Law Firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello to each one of our Lawsome listeners. Today on the show, we have Nadine Atkinson-Flowers, an immigration lawyer here in the United States who also focuses on Jamaican legal issues that affect U.S. immigration. In Jamaica, Nadine focuses on the areas of criminal and family law primarily. She's also written books, actively volunteers in her communities, and creates educational videos on YouTube. Today's discussion is around effective time and workload management. We're going to talk through a solo practitioner's experience managing not one, but two different law firms in two separate countries. Nadine, thank you so much for joining the show.
Hi, thank you very much, Tanner, for that very gracious welcome. And thank you for having me on the program.
Absolutely. Very excited to have you here. And with all you're doing, Nadine, one could say that you're a superhero.
I'm going to look for my cape. I do have a gown. At home in Jamaica, when you go to the higher courts, you have to wear a gown and it's all very fancy. So that's the closest I have to a cape.
Well, we need to capture that. We need to capture that and put that all over the web. You have obviously ran a very successful practice, and being a solo practitioner who is managing two different law firms is seemingly such a huge undertaking, and it's recurring day to day. And in addition to all of that, you're a content creator who just released what I believe is your fourth book. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, that's right. My fourth book. When you say it now, it sounds extremely tiring.
Yes, it does. But that's what we want to extract. We want to dig into that today and really understand how do you do it all? Where does that come from? But let's get started, if you don't mind, really with this first opening question. So to handle all of it all at the same time, you've clearly proven something here, right? In order just to be able to maintain and keep up an effective practice and keeping up with the workload that we know comes with running two different law firms. To us, we assume you have a very specific proven system to successfully manage this workload. Can you speak to that? Is there a system or a method to the madness, if you will?
A method to the madness, or perhaps just madness. I I pretty much am a very organized person. I think that's where a lot of the management skills come from. I'm very organized. I'm a solo, and I mean, I think all solos out there will let you know that if we don't have some kind of a system, then we're going to have problems. I live by my checklists. I think some of the automated tools that have certainly come on the market over the years have been very helpful. When I came to the States in 2015, I think, we never envisioned this whole pandemic and the Zoom reality and all those virtual platforms. But necessity meant that I had to kind of pivot very quickly to begin to speak to my clients who are still in Jamaica and overseas by more telephone methods, that kind of thing. But there have been now more of an embrace by persons of the virtual platforms. I use those a lot for my clients who I can't be physically close to. So that's been really helpful in helping me to steer the ship, as it were.
Makes sense. You referenced a checklist, and I'm curious, Nadine, did you find that, like, was there a template checklist that you were able to collect from a mentor previously, or was this all born out of just your own boots on the ground experience and you've evolved that? How did that work?
Both. I actually started out as a prosecutor in Jamaica, and that in and of itself was quite an eye-opening experience, because if ever you've been told that law school is not real law, that's when you find that out. When you begin prosecuting, you recognize that there's so much that, they either forgot to tell you or they didn't know. So when I became a prosecutor, I had lots of persons who helped me, lots of mentors, senior attorneys, persons who'd been working in the court system for many years, and a lot of them showed me the ropes, as it were, and I started to develop my own checklist. Some of them offered me templates of what they had done, what had worked for them, and I started to add to it, take away, what I didn't find so useful from my own practice, and developed it along the way, and kind of decided to hone it and make it my own, as it were. And then I went into defense, and there it was on the other side, but the same basic treatments were needed when you had files to deal with and clients, deadlines with the court, or self-imposed deadlines with your clients. So a lot of that has been works in progress, I would like to think, and still work in progress.
Any business owner, I think, would agree that there's a constant evolution to processes and checklists. But I think hearing it from you that it's a combination. You lean on prior mentors, you lean on others who have kind of blazed the trail ahead of you, but you also just have to accept that there are certain cultural differences within your firm and what you create that you have to adapt based on that.
Absolutely. That is true.
Well, you mentioned tools, and obviously, and you also mentioned the pandemic, both of which are big topics for a company like ours, where we're managing day to day on totally virtually. But I would say, and I've had this conversation with dozens and dozens of other lawyers, that the pandemic forced the legal profession ahead, arguably 10 plus years. There were a lot of law firms that from my experience, there were managing lawyers who were kind of digging their heels into the ground and not necessarily adapting at the pace that other industries were adapting with the concept of digitalization. Digitalization being the ability of digital technology to capture and assess data within the business and make better business decisions to enable new business models, like what we're talking about, this concept of evolution. So speaking to that concept, the idea that digitalization is really forcing a lot of law firms to get on board, to leverage the tools and the data around them. What's the most substantial impact that you've personally seen in this respect, this whole modernization of law firms and technology?
I would have to say there have been several. For example, and as you say, the pandemic has forced the legal profession perhaps to move 10 years faster than it would have, because unfortunately the law tends to lag behind. So I've seen, in terms of digitization, now I can write a brief and I can check it using one of those virtual assistants that tells me if I've forgotten an important case, or if a particular case has been overruled and is no longer good law. 15 years ago, when I started out as a lawyer, that did not exist in my realm anyway. It perhaps existed other places, but it certainly didn't exist in my sphere. Now I can do that. I utilize, for example, on my own little basic level, the whole issue of data mining. So, for example, I'm checking to see where my client's coming from. Am I meeting them more virtually or in person? What do they want in terms of when we meet? Because obviously there are some persons, when you're talking with them, they're very savvy. The clients now are extremely technologically savvy. And as such, they're actually pushing the lawyers to get as technologically savvy as they are. I'm learning now that I'm on maybe 5 or 6 platforms, and perhaps at the end of each week, I'm checking to see where did I get the most in terms of clientele this week, or contact, or something as simple as my client saying to me, I don't have this particular platform, or I'm not comfortable with this particular platform, which now forces me to get comfortable with the platform that they're using. And so I have perhaps 15 platforms on my computers, because in maybe any 2 or 3 days, clients will be saying, oh, I prefer to use X, or I prefer to use Y. In that sphere, digitization has certainly become something that we have to reckon with. A lot of courts certainly were not envisioning that we would now be doing perhaps all virtual platforms. Virtual trials. I know that there are states that have embarked on virtual trials. I did a couple of CLEs about 2 weeks ago, and one of the judges who were speaking, she said she had done maybe 5 Zoom trials in the last month, and she was actually going to be doing another one when she came off the program she was moderating for us. So I'm thinking that it's a good thing that this is happening, because you have to meet your clients in their spaces. And I think gone are the days when we would both be traveling 3-4 hours for a 10-minute meeting with the judge, or for a date, or do disclosure, discovery, that kind of thing. So it's become quite useful. And of course, your analytics is something that's becoming even more crucial. It's been a ride, I think.
It is a ride indeed. And it's those, the business owners that have taken the ride, willing to hop in the vehicle and go, as opposed to hold back. Those are the ones who've obviously embraced the technology, and that have, many of which thrived during this pandemic, because you hit on a couple really important pieces, I think, Nadine. One in particular that I want to point out is the idea that you leaned into the client, customer service. What are they using? How are they communicating? How are they adapting technology? And how can I ultimately mirror that and give them that experience? And I think that's gold. That mindset, ultimately, even if you may not be able to figure out the technology right away, but if you have the mindset and the commitment to adapt as clients are requesting it, that is a powerful differentiator as a business owner. So I respect that so much. But I also want to touch on, if you don't mind, I want to shift this topic a little bit, because we've talked about what opportunities have come with this substantial impact that digitalization has brought about for lawyers. But let's talk about the opposite, or at least the misconception, I'll call it, that I believe is floating around the legal profession, and that is that digitalization is a threat to the legal community, to the legal profession. And there are some technologies that are coming available, AI type technologies. You even referenced, technology that goes in and reviews the law, big law across the board, and pushes some of that new law to you in an efficient way so that you can guide your clients the best way. That is a red flag to some lawyers, saying that, will the profession of law actually be around in 10 to 20 years? What's your take on that? How would you speak to the legal community around that?
I sincerely hope we'll still be around. Obviously, it's going to change, because we are already seeing the changes that are taking place. And as you spoke, I thought of AI, the whole business of artificial intelligence and how it's affecting everything, not just the legal profession. I would like us to think, or to take away from conversations such as these, we see it as an opportunity and not so much as a threat to our existence. Because what are the ways in which we can utilize the best aspects of AI? I'm not truly a techie, so I would never dare to delve into the depth of it. But I can say, from where I sit, that I found it to be useful. I can say that over-reliance on it may well be a problem. And I think perhaps that is where we may need to examine, are we being too reliant on certain aspects of technology, as it were? And I would perhaps just go back to the whole issue of a brief that you would have written for a particular case, or you have a matter coming up and you ran it through one of these software and you felt comfortable. But I would like to say that you ought not to take 100% comfort from that. Perhaps you need to do something very basic that lawyers of yesteryear would have done. Get to the library and see, or, one of those databases, and see if you have all of the case law, if the legislation is current, and so on. I guess over-reliance, if there's such a thing, over-reliance then on the whole business of digitization is perhaps where the threat is, because you perhaps have a comfort level that you may not have had when it was all pencil and paper. I think perhaps that's my opinion anyways.
I see that. And I can, just for our business, I believe, there have been so many efficiencies that technology and software has created for us, but I've always had the commitment to ensure we have enough checks and balances in place, enough human intervention or review in that process so that you can identify that? Because you're right, it's so easy to fall in the trap of automate everything and lean on technology. And at the end of the day, going back to the earlier point you made about customer service, do you potentially lose your ability to serve the client if you embrace it too much or too far? I think that's a great counterpoint, just in terms of finding that balance and leveraging it, but not getting too dependent on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't know. I have a very favorite movie where the computer calculates that person A has a particular percentage of chance of survival and person B has less, and so the computer decides that person B will be allowed to die. If we translate that into our legal practice, some of our clients come and surprise, surprise, they actually don't want you to tell them what to do. They know what should be done, but they want to examine the options and they want a personal touch, as it were, whilst examining their options. And obviously, a computer can't do that.
Emotion and relationships are still a critical part to customer experience. Excellent points there. Nadine, I'm going to keep moving, because I think there are a lot of other things we want to cover, and I want to dive in just to the concept of operating and managing a virtual law firm practice, and not just one, two. And I'm curious to hear, has there ever been any advice that has been given to you with respect to running a virtual law office that you'd be willing to share with our listeners? Anything that you've implemented and lived by?
Well, as I said, I actually have, and I collect them as I go along, mentors in the legal space, and I have mentors in other areas as well. And I think one of the best bits of advice I've had, as I said earlier, meeting the client where they are, and this whole business of connecting on multiple platforms. Out of expediency, I had to switch to virtual when I came here, because I had literally closed my office on the Friday and I was on a plane on the Saturday. And so I literally had no downtime, and I could not go back immediately, because now I needed to start getting myself oriented and situated here. And so I had to figure out what were the tools that I was going to use to start this virtual practice. And I've had some successes, I've had some failures, because obviously, being far away from those clients who were in Jamaica, there were some hiccups at the beginning. But one of the good things is that I'd always had clients who lived overseas whilst I was in Jamaica. And so I was able to kind of lean into those positives that I'd had all along and utilize them as I began to grow that practice, and then to grow this practice here. I do have a physical space here, and I have a physical space in Jamaica. So for those clients who may feel, oh, I absolutely refuse to use a virtual platform, except for in the height of the pandemic, there is that physical space where they can come and we can do their business. I think another thing that has helped me in going virtual whilst remaining accessible to clients in all of the spaces that I have been in is to actually let the client know that, listen, you have the choice. Do you want us to meet virtually? You upload your documents to the platform. I found that to be such a blessing. The only problem is when they've uploaded 100 documents, you will have to go through those 100 documents.
That's when the work begins.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been really very useful. I am still very much a paper person. I make my notes. And so even if you've submitted to me the documents, sometimes within the very discussion, the answer lies when you have those discussions with them. Or you can get evidence dependent on what you're doing for a particular client. And so I always like to take a very full affidavit, or I take a full interview when I'm talking to my clients, and I write down what they've said. That's proven to be very useful in both spaces, because I can always check back the notes and see if this comports with what they said, or if it comports with evidence that they gave me, especially concerning dates. In the immigration space, dates are very important because one wrong date can bring an allegation of fraud, but it could actually be mistake. And we can show that in the criminal law space, the client may well have a defense, but because he or she is not a criminal lawyer, he or she might say, "Oh, this is what happened, and I'm guilty." Or it could be that the information can be used in mitigation, or if it is that the person has, if it's a family matter, for example, there's so many permutations that we can look at and examine. So it's always very important, I find, in the two spaces that I've been occupying, virtually and physically, between the countries, to make sure that I'm in touch with what's happening with the clients.
What percentage are you seeing? And I'm just curious about this. Now that we're past, that pandemic era, if you will, are you finding that the majority of your clients are still comfortable meeting virtually, or do you find that there's still a heavy percentage that want to, go face-to-face interactions in a physical place?
I would have to say perhaps 50-50. I do have some where we meet initially in virtual space and then they come to the office, or I go to them, dependent on distance or whatever it is that they need. The good thing is that immigration is as such that you practice it throughout the whole country. So I have clients in Florida, I have clients in Georgia, I have clients in New York. Depending on what's happening, we may meet in a physical place. Like if they're coming into, I'm in the Philadelphia area, they might say, "Okay, I'm coming to Philly, can we meet?" Or clients who, in fact, I'm going to Florida next week to meet a client for a particular issue. I try to be flexible, dependent on what's happening, but people are comfortable now in the virtual space, I find. And as I said, the whole business of the technology affords that they can see me and I can see them, and we can exchange documents securely and do our business.
And you stressed the point earlier that just giving the option from the very beginning, here's how we typically do it. We meet virtually. If you don't want to do that, or if, for any reason, we can always meet in person. To me, I think for our listeners that have completely, taken the route of a virtual business, I applaud you for that. But I would encourage you to hear what Nadine's saying there. 50% of potential clients and existing clients still prefer that face-to-face, in-person interaction. And so to continue to serve the client, you absolutely want to consider, how can I cater to that demographic, even though, seemingly more and more people are comfortable with virtual meetings, there's still going to be a percentage of people that prefer the opposite.
Absolutely. I guess one of the good things about the fact that people are perhaps more comfortable virtual is that you can literally have clients a million miles away. But if it is that the clients are expressing some reluctance or simply do not wish to, it's always useful to give them that option so they can know and make the decision.
That's it. Nadine, I want to kind of wrap up with a separate topic, and that's around your latest book, On Your Feet: Criminal Law Practice in the Parish Courts in Jamaica. I'm interested to know, for one, I'm sure a lot of listeners have considered writing their own book. It does seem like over the last decade or so, this is an area that's growing in popularity, especially for lawyers whenever they look to establish themselves in a particular industry or practice area type. And I love that. I mean, this is not your first book. In fact, it's your fourth book. So you've gone down this road and with success in the past. What is it like for somebody who may be considering this or not even taking some of those early steps toward endeavoring toward their own book? What would you explain that process? What is it like, and any advice you can give for someone who's going down that road?
I started writing many years ago. I would write, when you're a kid, you write poetry. And I started writing articles in the newspaper. One of those articles, I think that was actually my first book, because the publisher was one of the newspaper organizations in Jamaica, and they published all the articles on Caribbean history into the format of a book. which is still used now in the high schools. And my second and third books are also in Caribbean history. I have 2 degrees in Caribbean history, as a matter of fact. So perhaps that's why. And then I came to law, and I was lost. I didn't have a clue what I was doing as I started. And I thought, well, get back to what you know, start writing out all that you need to do each day. And that's how, I'll show it to you actually, that's how the book evolved. And the title is On Your Feet for a very specific reason, because in court in Jamaica, we follow the English tradition. And so we stand when we speak to the judge, and you stand when you speak to witnesses, and so on. And whilst I was on my feet for a lot of the times, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So I started to make my notes, I started to make jottings, asking lots and lots of questions, and the book sort of evolved from there. I like to go chronologically and alphabetically, so I start with my A's, and literally I go down to my Z's to say the topics, and I'm just going down and I'm creating little notes, little sticky pads. I have 1,000 of those, and then I start putting it all together. Writing is not a clean process. Some people might think that, oh, I start with chapter 1 and then I progress to chapter 2 and then the end. That's at least not for me. I've written the chapters as I've been experiencing the particular issue, or I'm doing a particular thing, and rewrites and third rewrites. And finally you say, okay, there is perhaps nothing more I can do where this segment is concerned, except if the law has changed. Because obviously if the law has changed, then you would have to address that. But it's not a nice, tidy process. And I don't think it should be, because it's you creating, and you're creating this content, whether it's for your YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel sometimes. When I'm making my videos, I just make the video and I stop. Because if you don't, you're going to go back and you're going to change and you're going to be fixing, and you'll never put the video up. It's the same thing with a book or any piece of writing. Just start. And I know there are lots of persons who are perhaps listening who have great ideas, wonderful content that they can share. And they're thinking, oh, I don't know where to start. That's right. The place. That's exactly the place to start, right there. Just put the pen on the paper or put it on the laptop or your phone. Just start. And the rewrites will come. But if you have nothing to rewrite except this blank slate, then you have a problem. And so this book has actually been somewhat of an evolution, because the law has changed significantly. It's become very useful since I've been in the immigration space, because a lot of US immigration is affected by what happens in your home country, whether it's Jamaica or another country, especially where it comes to the criminal law. And not negatively speaking all the time, because whoever is going to be coming to the US, whether you're coming to visit, you're coming to live as I did, or you're coming as a student, you're going to have to get a police record. You are not going to be allowed in the country unless the country is sure that you are a person of good repute. And a book like mine comes in handy, because it tells you some of the things that are needed. I have found that in the writing space, I have friends who say, oh, I want to write, and they have a lot to say, because as you recognize, lawyers like to speak. We have a lot to say. But we also have a lot that we should be writing, so that audiences can share with us. And not just legal audiences, but average citizens who want to know what's happening in the courts. Because justice should be accessible to everyone and understood by everyone. It ought not just to be that the lawyers and the judges can converse and everybody else in the space is looking askance and saying, what in the name of heavens are they talking about? So I write, in my view, in such a way that persons can understand and appreciate it and say, oh, I read in this book called On Your Feet that this is what happens in this particular court, or when they talk about the jurisdiction, this is what they mean, or if they're talking about persons being on bail or people appealing, these are the kind of things that they're talking about. That's always my aim, for persons to understand more about the court. I have this thing in my head that I am the literary guide for access to justice. perhaps most people don't agree, but that's my little phrase for myself. And so I would encourage anybody out there who is thinking of writing. There is never going to be a time when you have nothing to do. Life is happening for all of us. You have your kids, you have your families, you have your religious groups, you have work. So it's never going to be that you get a month off. I don't know if you've got that, an entire month off to just start writing. I don't. So I would just say start and go forth.
Such wonderful encouragement and practical, actionable advice there. And that is often the excuse that gets in the way for all of us is there's not enough time. And that's really the focus of this whole conversation, Nadine, is, it really, it's every single day that you're taking action. It doesn't happen overnight. And that's what you ultimately need to give yourself the forgiveness, if you will, that it's not going to happen tomorrow or in the next week. You're just chipping it away at it. And that's where the efficiency comes in, is when you're able to commit to doing it and prioritizing it, because you make time for what's important ultimately. Were there any questions? I'm curious, any questions that you would have wished I would have asked you that you could answer right now?
No questions really, but a comment. I want to thank you really for inviting me on the podcast, because for solos, sometimes the journey is very arduous. A lot of solos may not have a strong network. When I came here, I didn't really have a strong network. I'm still growing it. And so I want to thank you for giving solos such as myself the opportunity to talk about what we do, to share what we do. And of course, I definitely want to thank you for just accepting to talk with me, somebody whom you've never met before, and somebody who just saw your podcast and thought, oh, this looks really interesting. I just really wanted the connection. And here we are. So I thank you and I applaud your efforts. And I look forward to listening in the future to all of what you share with others, and to invite other content creators to give other persons a voice, because a lot of content creators will create their content, but they may not know how to get it into a larger audience, to market it to larger audiences. So efforts such as yours must not go unapplauded.
Thank you for that, Nadine. We're grateful for your time, grateful for your expertise and being willing to share it with our listeners. For those who are interested in reaching out to you, what's the best way they can contact you?
There's my website, which is www.atkinsonflowerslaw.com, or my email, info@atkinsonflowerslaw.com. My phone number, 484-995-7260. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I have a YouTube channel where I talk about US immigration and that interconnection with Jamaican law as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nadine.
Great. Thanks very much, Tanner. You have a great day.
Lawsome by Consultwebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next Lawsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.